Okay, this is one of those really boring topics that you need to know, and the more you know about it, the better stuff will happen. And it's one of those things that makes the difference between acceptable mastering and actually good mastering. We're going to talk about fades. Now, I'm not talking about specifically cross-fading audio like you would do in audio editing or comping, like vocal takes, production, that kind of stuff. I'm talking about fades within the beginning and the end of stereo mixdown, which is what we're working with in mastering. So there's a couple of rules with fades that are almost always true and are good to go by. And it's to do with how our ears work, it's to do with how our brains interpret audio at different levels, and it's to do with the frequency information that our ears understand. The first rule, and this is something which really pisses me off in audio software, is that linear fades, as in a straight line like that, always sound wrong. The reasons for this are many. One really simple one is that decibels are a logarithmic scale, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to, show it as a straight line. That's not a big issue. That's more of a pedantic issue. But that's how DAWs have kind of always worked. The second is that if you're going to quickly go into something, you want to use like an exponential curve. So one that goes like that. So you introduce the sound at a low level, and then you quickly go up to the point at which the song starts. Usually this is the case. This is normally when you've got noise at the start of a track, and you've then got like a couple of seconds of noise, and then you've got the start of the track, like the downbeat. And you don't want to fade into the noise because you don't want people to think it's there. I mean, with older stuff with tape noise, you would probably leave it in or try and crossfade it from tape noise from the previous track or whatever. But if it's like hum, microphone noise, the self noise of any equipment that people have used, you generally want to do and then kick in. What that means is that you don't get a click when you go in because you're not going from nothing to something, but at the same time, you're not allowing your brain long enough to go, there is noise, now there's a track. The third rule is that like a cosine, like a wiggly, like an S on its side shape, I guess you could just call it a sinusoid. I'm not entirely sure. The maths seems to be unsure about how to describe this, but it's the shape that's like this. So it goes down slowly, then quickly, then slowly again. If you've got a bulk of audio, say you're fading a track from earlier, so you loops and then you're fading it, you do it like this. This is almost always the fade that you use, especially for doing it over a sequence of like, a musical loop, say a bar, 2 bars, 3 bars, whatever, of repeats. The technical reasons for this, like I said earlier, are to do with the way that we hear. I'm not going to go into the details of that because I'm not a physicist and I'm not a biologist and I'm not something in the middle. But I can say that if you were to do a manual, my cat's about to come in again. Here we go. Different one this time. See if I get on the camera. No, he's run off. If you are doing a musical loop and you were to bring it down with your hands, like like on a mixing console, and you were listening for consistency, this is generally what we find that people do. So it's introducing, doing the bulk of it, and then lopping it off the end. Our ears basically have an EQ in them, and as we listen to quieter materials, our ears essentially, almost like a multiband expander, listen closer, or sort of an auto EQ kind of thing, like a dynamic EQ. And if you don't do it in this particular shape, you can be taken out of the moment as far as just feeling it disappear, because it breaks down that, it basically makes your brain think harder about the sound, and you then become aware of it. I'm going to do another video next where I'm going to talk about gaps between tracks, but the type of fades that you use will often be determined by what's just happened and what's coming next. That's the case in like mastering a lot. You think about the linear of the sound. What's the experience? This is what you don't think about when you're mixing or producing. You don't think about, I mean, you might compose a little bit in this way, but you don't think specifically what is the listener going to experience outside of the music. And mastering engineers are very attuned to this. So at the end of tracks, most likely what you're going to fade is either noise like before, or a tricky one, reverb and delay tails. There's two issues basically that come up quite a lot, and mastering engineers will probably corroborate this. People don't let the reverb die or the effects end die, as in it doesn't have the natural decay that it's had for the whole of the track up until that point. So it's going decay, and it goes chops off. Or there's an effect which has a loop in it, some sort of element of feedback, like a tape echo, and that goes on and on and on and on and on. And it gets to a base level and just freezes, and then that's just been left to die. I mean, with that, you can do some quite cool stuff where you can then put a fade into that noise, so you kind of hear it a little bit and then it trails off. That can be quite a pleasant sound. With reverb tails which are too long, reverb tails which are too short, haven't been allowed to die down. If you can rebounce it, if it's really noticeable, that's worth doing. You can kind of try a couple of different fades into it. You might try and do a fade like that, so it's flat and then goes whips down. But our ears are sensitive to this stuff because we use reverb, the room sound, the sound of stuff reflecting off walls, as an evolutionary trait. So anything like that can take the listener at the moment, I would have a listen to it, try and fade it. If the fade doesn't sound right, doesn't sound consistent with the rest of the album, for example, I would consider asking if it was rebounced. There is a trick that I don't think I've ever actually used, but it's when you've got a reverb that is a kind of classical sound, as in you can tell that it's a sort of room sound, maybe like a lexicon plate or like an EMT plate sound. You can sort of rebuild that sound and then add it into the end and do like a crossover. So you basically do almost like a feeding it into itself, and then you create a new reverb and you fade that with the reverb that's already there. You can get quite good results doing that with some clever automation. But that's really a restoration thing. If we can avoid doing that, we should avoid it. So yeah, fades. It's a boring topic. There are rules of thumb that I would start with. It is different in mastering compared to editing vocals and stuff, editing instruments. It's a bit less technical, but it's also, there are different techniques. So yeah, the best thing to do is listen to it. Avoid linear fades. If you're going to introduce something quickly, try and do a fade which is quick, that starts from nothing and appears quickly, so that your ears have a chance to acclimatise to the sound, but you don't create like a glitch. And if you're doing fades at the end of something, make sure that it's musically correct. And if you're fading into actual music itself, use that sinusoid shape, because it will allow you to remove bulks of the audio bit by bit in a way that our ears aren't taken out of the listening experience. Next video is going to be about gaps and sequencing. I hope this is interesting. This is slightly dry stuff now, but it's important. And if you're going to take someone's project on to do some mastering, you need to have already really nailed your preferences in for how to do this. Anyway, goodbye, and don't let friends don't let friends use linear fades. That's a rule.